December 7th, 1941, the United States was attacked on Hawaii from Japan. The attack came as a surprise to the United States, which would ultimately throw the U.S. into World War II. After the attack, Hawaii became under martial law because of the concern of Japanese Americans already living on the island. This idea of martial law on Hawaii was from the belief of Japanese spies living on Hawaii that helped with the attack or would help with future attacks. Under martial law, government officials rounded up and selected close to 1,500 Japanese civilians living in Hawaii. The officials sent them to detention camps, imposed curfews and travel restrictions on the Japanese civilians. About 2 months after the attack on Harbor, the reigning president, Roosevelt, issued an executive order which gave the military power to designate zones where people could be excluded for national defense purposes. From this, about 112 Japanese families were forced to go to camps on the United States mainland. This meant, with about a 2-week notice, Japanese civilians had to leave their homes and bring only what they could carry. Many of the civilians had to sell their homes, their stores, and most of their assets to be used during life in the camps. Many of the citizens, while being evacuated, were held in temporary centers like military barracks. Then, they would usually be sent to one of 10 different intermittent camps. These camps were ran and set up by the War Relocation Authority, or WRA. They were located in California, Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, and Arkansas. They were all guarded and enclosed with barbed wires where the guardees had the intent and authority to shoot and kill any attempting Japanese civilian. These camps were self-contained communities with hospitals, schools, and each with a form of government. The WRA allowed one family per room, which were extremely small, had cots and mattresses with blankets, a stove, and a single light. The Japanese civilians had to use public restrooms and public laundromats to wash their clothes. They ate meals in the mess hall 3 times a day, in large crowds on small, crowded tables. They were given small allowances for clothes and other personal items, which was usually around $5. There were rare places to work and gain wages, but compared to the outside world, they were extremely low. Family life and social interactions took an extreme dip during life in the camp. Parents lost power over their children because they had the same work and social status as their children. There were the occasional baseball leagues and movies which the Japanese could attend and participate, but they were extremely rare. Families also did not get to see other outside relatives due to separation throughout the camps. In 1943, the WRA started to allow 17-year-olds to leave the camp. The WRA would distribute a questionnaire designed to determine whether the 17-year-olds had an allegiance to the Japanese emperor. Those who would pass the test would be able to leave the camps for work or school. Also, some of the civilians were allowed to join specific Japanese regiments in the United States Army to fight the war in the Pacific. Finally, throughout December 1944, Japanese civilians were gradually allowed to leave the camps throughout the country. Unfortunately, many of their homes and businesses were vandalized, destroyed, or taken over. The financial loss of the Japanese civilians during their time in the camp was roughly 400 million, or 5.2 billion in today's dollars. After the war, a man named Fred Korematsu decided to test the government relocation action in court. The famous name for the case was Korematsu vs. the United States. The Supreme Court ruled that the executive order was a wartime necessity. After this ruling, many Japanese civilians received hostility from neighbors and towns which did not allow them to return to their villages. Because of this, the civilians were scattered across the country with nowhere to go. Then, years later, in 1988, Congress made an attempt to apologize to the civilians by awarding each of them with $20,000.